In a world full of uncertainties, knowing what to stockpile can be the difference between struggling through a crisis or surviving it with ease. Today, we're uncovering 30 foods that never expire, essential items that could outlast us and provide a reliable source of nourishment no matter what happens. But here's the kicker. Many of these foods are hiding in plain sight, and a few of them have incredible stories that go back thousands of years. From ancient honey discovered in Egyptian tombs to a simple staple that could sit in your pantry for generations, there's so much you might not know. In this video, you'll learn why certain foods never spoil, how to store them properly, and what you need to add to your stockpile to be fully prepared for the unexpected. Trust me, some of these foods will surprise you, and they might just save you one day. Welcome to Prepper Pantry, your go-to channel for smart prepping tips and survival strategies. If you're serious about staying prepared for any emergency, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a crucial update. Let's dive in. Before we dive into the more unique and surprising foods on this list, let's start with the basics. Grains and staples. These are the backbone of most diets around the world, and many of them are perfect for long-term storage. What's fascinating is that some of the most common pantry items, things you probably already have at home, can last for decades, if not forever, when stored the right way. Let's kick things off with white rice. This isn't just a staple food, it's a survival essential. White rice, unlike brown rice, has had its husk, bran, and germ removed. This processing takes away the oils that can cause it to spoil, which is why white rice can last 30 years or more if you store it in airtight containers away from moisture and pests. It's one of the most calorie-dense foods you can store, providing nearly 2,000 calories per pound. And in times of crisis, something as simple as rice can be a lifesaver, high in energy, easy to cook, and incredibly versatile. Next up is dried pasta. Now you might think pasta is just another pantry item, but it's so much more than that. Dried pasta has a low moisture content, which is key to its long shelf life. Properly sealed in a cool, dark place, pasta can last up to 30 years or even longer. It's a fantastic staple to keep in your stockpile because it's lightweight, easy to cook, and can be combined with almost any sauce, protein, or vegetable you might have stored. Plus, pasta can be comforting when times are tough, offering a bit of normalcy in an emergency situation. Moving on to whole wheat grains. These are often overlooked by preppers, but they're actually a hidden treasure for long-term food storage. Whole wheat grains can last for 30 years or more when stored correctly, airtight, in a cool and dry environment. What makes them special is that you can grind them into fresh flour whenever you need it. Fresh flour not only tastes better, but it also has more nutritional value than the store-bought kind, which tends to go rancid after just a couple of years. With whole wheat grains in your stockpile, you're not just storing food, you're preserving the ability to bake bread, make pancakes, or cook up a hearty porridge, all from scratch. And now, let's talk about powdered milk. While it might not sound as exciting as some other foods, powdered milk is actually an essential for long-term prep. Fresh milk spoils within days, but powdered milk can last up to 20 years or more if stored unopened and in a cool, dry place. It's incredibly versatile. You can reconstitute it with water for drinking, use it in baking, or add it to coffee and tea. Even better, it's a great source of calcium and protein, making it a crucial nutrient provider when fresh dairy products aren't available. Plus, powdered milk often comes fortified with vitamins, which can help ensure you're getting vital nutrients in tough times. Let's not forget cornstarch. Most people use it for thickening soups or sauces, but did you know that cornstarch can last indefinitely if stored properly? Like rice and pasta, cornstarch has a very low moisture content, making it nearly impossible for it to spoil. Beyond thickening food, you can also use cornstarch for non-food purposes like making a simple glue or even treating minor skin irritations. It's another versatile item you'll be thankful to have in your pantry. We've got lentils and beans. While not grains, they fit perfectly in this category because they're dried and store incredibly well. Dried beans and lentils can last up to 30 years when stored in proper conditions. They're packed with protein and fiber, making them an excellent meat substitute in times when fresh food is scarce. Plus, they expand when cooked, meaning a small amount can go a long way in feeding a family. Before we talk about the preserved foods that can last indefinitely, let's consider why preservation methods work so well in the first place. When foods are dried, canned, or pickled, it's not just about convenience, it's about stopping time, removing moisture, sealing in airtight containers, and using natural preservatives like vinegar or salt can extend the shelf life of certain foods far beyond what we typically expect. One prime example is canned beans. They're packed full of protein, fiber, and essential nutrients, but here's the real kicker. Canned beans can last for decades if stored properly. The canning process locks out air and bacteria, keeping the contents inside fresh for years. You might think they'd lose flavor or texture over time, but as long as the can remains sealed and undamaged, those beans will be ready whenever you need them. Another fascinating food is honey, which is practically immortal. Archaeologists have found jars of honey in ancient Egyptian tombs that are thousands of years old and still edible. Honey's natural composition, with its high sugar content and low moisture, creates an environment where bacteria simply can't grow. So, if you're stocking up, honey is a must. It's not just a sweetener, it's a survival tool. Next up is vinegar. You might have it sitting in your pantry right now, but did you know that vinegar has an indefinite shelf life? This is thanks to its high acidity, which prevents the growth of any harmful microorganisms. Whether it's white vinegar or apple cider vinegar, it can be used for cooking, preserving other foods, or even cleaning. That's one item that serves multiple purposes, and it never goes bad. And let's not forget about salt. While we think of salt primarily as a seasoning, it's also one of the oldest and most reliable preservatives. Salt has been used for centuries to cure meat, preserve vegetables, and even in the pickling process. As long as it's kept dry, salt will last forever. It's a simple yet powerful addition to any stockpile, not just for flavor, but for its ability to preserve other foods. Before we dive into the more obvious pantry items, let's talk about a category that often gets overlooked when prepping for the long haul: sweeteners and condiments. These aren't just about flavor. They're essential for enhancing meals and, in some cases, even preserving food. And the best part? Some of them have the ability to last indefinitely. First up is honey. You may have heard that honey never spoils, but the science behind it is fascinating. Honey's long shelf life is thanks to its natural makeup. It has a very low water content and is highly acidic, creating an environment where bacteria simply cannot thrive. What's even more astonishing is that archaeologists have found pots of honey in ancient Egyptian tombs that are over 3,000 years old, and they were still perfectly edible. That's because as long as honey is kept sealed and away from moisture, it won't spoil. It might crystallize over time, but that's easily fixed by warming it up. Next, let's talk about sugar. Specifically, granulated sugar. Like honey, sugar has an indefinite shelf life if stored properly. This is because sugar absorbs moisture from the air, and as long as you keep it in a dry, airtight container, it'll last forever. Even if it hardens or clumps together, it's not a problem. You can simply break it up or grind it down, and it's good as new. Plus, sugar can be used to preserve fruits through canning or making jams, extending the life of other food items as well. Molasses is another sweetener that's often forgotten in prepping, but is worth stocking up on. It's a byproduct of sugar processing and has a thick, syrupy texture. The high sugar content in molasses, combined with its low water activity, makes it resistant to spoilage. Properly stored, molasses can last years. Just keep it in a cool, dry place and tightly sealed to prevent it from drying out or fermenting. Moving on from sweeteners, let's touch on soy sauce. This is a condiment that doesn't just add rich, umami flavor to your meals, it also lasts nearly forever. Thanks to the fermentation process and high salt content, soy sauce is self-preserving. Salt acts as a natural barrier to bacteria, preventing spoilage and making soy sauce one of the best condiments to stockpile. Just be sure to store it in a cool, dark place, and once opened, it'll still last for years. And speaking of salt, while it's technically a seasoning, it also functions as a preservative and plays a crucial role in long-term food storage. Salt draws out moisture, which is why it's been used for centuries to cure meats and preserve other foods. A stockpile of salt can not only season your food, but also extend the life of other perishable items. Another powerhouse in the condiment world is vinegar. Whether it's white vinegar, apple cider vinegar, or balsamic vinegar, they all have one thing in common: acidity. The high acidity in vinegar creates an inhospitable environment for bacteria, which is why vinegar lasts indefinitely. Plus, it's extremely versatile. Not only can you use it to flavor dishes, but vinegar also works as a preservative, an all-natural cleaner, and even as a way to pickle vegetables, further extending their shelf life. Lastly, let's not forget maple syrup. Although not as long-lasting as honey, real maple syrup can be stored indefinitely if unopened and kept in a cool, dry place. Once opened, it can last in the refrigerator for up to a year. The key is to avoid mold by keeping it sealed, but even if mold does form, many people simply skim it off the top, and the syrup underneath remains perfectly safe to eat. When you think about it, these sweeteners and condiments aren't just for flavor, they are tools for survival. Stockpiling them means not only adding variety to your meals during an emergency, but also ensuring that you have natural preservatives on hand to help extend the life of other foods in your pantry. Before we talk about the common cooking oils you might be familiar with, let's start with one that surprises many people: coconut oil. Unlike most oils, which can go rancid after a few years, coconut oil is different. Thanks to its high saturated fat content, it can last for years when stored in a cool, dark place. In fact, if it's sealed properly and kept away from heat, it can be a reliable fat source in your stockpile for a very long time. Now, you might be thinking about oils like olive oil or vegetable oil, which tend to have shorter shelf lives. That's true. Most oils will eventually break down, but coconut oil is much more stable. Its solid form at room temperature also helps protect it from oxidation, meaning it stays fresher longer. This is why coconut oil is one of the few oils we recommend for long-term storage. But what if you're looking for another fat source that lasts even longer? Enter ghee, also known as clarified butter. Ghee has been used for centuries in places like India, not just for its flavor, but because it can last for months, sometimes years, without refrigeration. By removing the milk solids during the clarifying process, ghee becomes a shelf-stable fat, perfect for cooking and flavoring food when fresh butter isn't available. It's a must-have for anyone serious about stocking up for the long haul. There's another lesser-known fat source that's worth mentioning: lard. Pure rendered lard can be stored for a long time without going bad, especially if you store it in a sealed container in a cool place. It was a staple for cooking and baking before vegetable oils became widespread, and it still has its place in a well-stocked pantry. While not as long-lasting as ghee or coconut oil, properly stored lard can provide essential fats when needed. Before we move on to other types of oils, let's touch on vinegar-based dressings. While not oils themselves, some dressings made with oil and vinegar can last longer than you might think due to the natural preservatives found in vinegar. The acidity slows down the spoilage process, making them another smart addition to your stockpile. Of course, these will need to be checked from time to time, but they generally outlast typical salad oils. Before we dive into the most obvious long-lasting seasoning, salt, let's talk about some spices that often get overlooked: whole spices. You might not know this, but whole spices like peppercorns, cinnamon sticks, and nutmeg can last far longer than their ground counterparts. Ground spices tend to lose their potency after a couple of years, especially once they're exposed to air, light, and moisture. Whole spices, however, can retain their flavor for decades if they're stored correctly in a cool, dark place. The key to making them last is to keep them in airtight containers, away from heat and humidity. When it's time to use them, you can grind them fresh, giving your meals a burst of intense flavor. This makes whole spices a much better option for long-term storage than pre-ground varieties, and they'll stay just as fragrant when you finally get around to using them. Now, let's talk about salt, one of the most basic yet essential items for any stockpile. Salt is unique because it never expires. Whether it's table salt, sea salt, or even Himalayan salt. If stored properly, it will last forever. But salt is more than just a flavor booster. It's also an ancient method of food preservation. For thousands of years, people have used salt to cure meats and preserve foods because it draws out moisture and prevents bacteria from growing. Having salt in your stockpile isn't just about flavoring your food, it's also a vital tool for preserving other foods like fish, meats, and vegetables if refrigeration isn't an option. And in times of crisis, this preservation ability could become extremely valuable. Next, we have sugar. You might not think of sugar as a forever food, but much like salt, granulated sugar can last indefinitely if stored correctly. As long as sugar is kept dry and away from moisture, it won't spoil. This includes white sugar, brown sugar, and even powdered sugar. While you might primarily think of sugar for baking or sweetening drinks, in a survival situation, sugar can serve as a quick source of energy and can be used in fermentation processes, like making homemade preserves or alcohol. Just be sure to store it in a sealed, moisture-proof container, as sugar's main enemy is moisture, which can cause clumping and spoilage over time. Another often overlooked item for your stockpile is honey. Honey has been found in ancient Egyptian tombs, still perfectly edible after thousands of years. That's because honey has natural antibacterial properties, and its low moisture content prevents it from spoiling. While honey might crystallize over time, it's still safe to eat. Simply warm it up, and it will return to its liquid form. This makes honey not only a natural sweetener, but a true survival food with an endless shelf life. Next on the list are bouillon cubes. These little cubes pack a punch when it comes to flavor. They might not seem like much, but they can make a big difference when you're trying to turn simple ingredients into something tasty. Bouillon cubes, or powdered stock, can last for years in their original packaging if stored in a cool, dry place. They're lightweight, easy to store, and can instantly turn water, rice, or pasta into a savory dish. Plus, they come in a variety of flavors: chicken, beef, vegetable, so they add diversity to your meals with minimal effort. And we can't forget about vinegar-based dressings. While dressings themselves might not seem like they belong on a list of non-perishables, those made with a vinegar base actually have a surprisingly long shelf life. The acidity in vinegar acts as a natural preservative, slowing down the growth of bacteria and preventing spoilage. Vinegar by itself can also last indefinitely. Beyond dressings, vinegar can be used to pickle vegetables or preserve foods, making it an important dual-purpose item to keep in your pantry. Plus, vinegar has cleaning and disinfecting properties, so it's useful for much more than just your food. Another category to consider is dried herbs. While dried herbs like oregano, thyme, and rosemary won't last forever, they still hold their flavor for several years if stored properly. The key to keeping them fresh is to store them in airtight containers, away from sunlight, heat, and moisture. Unlike spices, which can last for decades if they're whole, dried herbs will eventually lose their potency. However, even after a few years, they're still usable, and they can bring a little freshness to your meals, especially when fresh herbs are unavailable. Some herbs, like bay leaves, can retain their flavor for an even longer period, making them another great choice for your stockpile. Finally, don't forget to include spice blends. Pre-made spice mixes, like taco seasoning or curry powder, can add a lot of flavor to basic ingredients. Just make sure they're sealed properly because, like ground spices, they will eventually lose their punch. But for the first few years, these blends can be lifesavers when it comes to making simple pantry meals taste more interesting. With these spices and seasonings, you won't just be prepared for an emergency, you'll also be able to add flavor, variety, and creativity to your meals, even with the simplest of ingredients. Now, let's move on to the next essential category for your stockpile. Before we get into the more common superfoods, let's talk about an ancient survival secret: pemmican. This might be a new term for some of you, but it's a food with a fascinating history. Pemmican was originally created by Native American tribes and later adopted by explorers and pioneers. It's made from a combination of dried meat, fat, and sometimes berries. What makes it so special? Its extreme shelf life. When stored properly in airtight containers, pemmican can last for decades without refrigeration. This was vital for people on long journeys with no access to fresh food. The high fat and protein content provides sustained energy, making it a perfect survival food. It's calorie dense, which means a small portion can fuel you for hours. You can even make it at home with simple ingredients. A homemade survival food that could last 20 years or more is something you definitely want in your stockpile. Now, let's move on to dried lentils. Lentils are one of the most underrated superfoods for survival situations. Not only are they a plant-based powerhouse of protein, but they're also packed with fiber, vitamins, and minerals like iron and magnesium, which are crucial for maintaining your health in a crisis. What makes lentils especially valuable is their fast cooking time compared to other dried beans. In a situation where fuel or energy sources are scarce, you'll want food that cooks quickly and doesn't require long hours of soaking. Lentils fit that bill perfectly. Plus, they're incredibly versatile. You can throw them into soups, stews, or even make them into patties for a protein-packed meal. When stored in a cool, dry place, dried lentils can last for years, giving you a reliable, nutritious food source whenever you need it. Next, we have hardtack, which may not be a food you've thought much about, but it's been a staple in survival situations for centuries. This dense, dry biscuit is made from just flour, water, and sometimes a bit of salt. Its origins go back to ancient times, but it's perhaps best known for being used by sailors and soldiers in the 18th and 19th centuries. Why? Because it doesn't spoil. When stored in an airtight container, hardtack can last for years, even decades. It's a basic food that's not about flavor. It's about survival. In a pinch, you can soften it in water or soup to make it easier to eat. It's not something you'll crave on a regular day, but in an emergency, it's a filling, long-lasting food that could sustain you when fresh food is out of reach. Another surprising addition to your survival pantry should be powdered eggs. Eggs are a fantastic source of protein and essential nutrients, but fresh eggs spoil quickly and are difficult to store long-term without refrigeration. This is where powdered eggs come in. When stored in an airtight container in a cool, dry place, powdered eggs can last for 5 to 10 years, sometimes even longer if properly sealed. The best part? You can rehydrate powdered eggs and use them just like fresh eggs in recipes for scrambled eggs, baking, or cooking. You'll be able to maintain a balanced diet with this versatile protein source, even if fresh eggs are no longer available. And if you're preparing for long-term survival, powdered eggs can ensure you always have access to an important and nutritious food. Finally, let's not overlook freeze-dried fruits and vegetables. Freeze-drying is one of the best preservation methods out there because it removes the moisture from food while retaining most of its nutritional content. This means freeze-dried foods can last 20 years or more if stored properly in airtight containers. Unlike other preserved fruits and veggies that may lose nutrients during processing, freeze-dried produce maintains much of its vitamins and minerals, making it a healthier option for long-term storage. What's great about freeze-dried foods is their versatility. You can eat them dry as a snack or rehydrate them by adding water, and they'll return to their original texture. They're lightweight, take up little space, and require no refrigeration. Stock up on freeze-dried strawberries, blueberries, spinach, and other nutrient-rich foods to ensure you have a well-rounded, healthy diet in any situation. What's particularly interesting about freeze-dried foods is their potential for comfort as well as nutrition. In a crisis, having something familiar like strawberries or a crunchy piece of apple can provide not just sustenance, but also a mental and emotional boost. That's something we don't often think about, how important comfort can be in times of stress. These foods not only keep you physically fueled, but they also help maintain a sense of normalcy, which is crucial in an emergency. With these survival superfoods in your pantry, you're not just stocking up on calories, you're ensuring that your body gets the nutrients it needs to stay healthy and strong. These foods are lightweight, long-lasting, and nutrient-dense, making them essential for any prepper's stockpile. So there you have it, 30 foods that never expire, ready to stockpile and keep your pantry prepared for whatever the future may bring. Whether it's the surprising longevity of coconut oil, the eternal shelf life of honey, or the essential power of salt, these items can give you peace of mind knowing you'll always have something reliable on hand. Remember, it's not just about having food, it's about having the right food that can stand the test of time. Start building your stockpile now, little by little, and you'll be prepared for anything. If you found this video helpful, make sure to like it and subscribe to Prepper Pantry. We post new tips every week to help you stay ready for whatever comes next. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.